get different theoretical perspectives on the U.S. economy. My colleague Edward Harrison spoke earlier this week with two very, very different guests, Don Boudreax and Richard Wolff. Now, Don is a libertarian professor of economics at George Mason University and a senior fellow at the Mercatus Center. Richard Wolff is a visiting professor in international affairs at the New School in New York and an expert on Marxist economics. First up, we'd like to share part two of Edward's interview with Don, and after the break, we'll be bringing you the second half of Dr. Wolff's interview. Edward first asked Don for his take on minimum wage and if it actually depresses unemployment. Take a look at what he had to say.
Look, a minimum wage is the worst form of social insurance because it doesn't guarantee anyone an income. It just says if you're lucky enough to get a job, then you'll get this higher wage. It doesn't say what the terms of those jobs will be. It doesn't specify what the terms of the fringe benefits will be. It doesn't guarantee that you'll get a job. In fact, as I believe is the case, it reduces the prospects of people getting a job. So if you really want to help poor people, the minimum wage is the absolute worst way to do it.
Okay. Now, how about globalization? The gains from trade. Here's something that I feel fairly strongly about. I'll try not to interject with my opinion here, but the gains from trade are supposed to be about the consumption from lower cost imports, while the loss is the foregone consumption because you're manufacturing things for someone else that you're going to give abroad. But somehow people are acting like it's the reverse. Look at Germany as an example. They're suppressing their wages and saying, look, go and work so that you can manufacture things for people to export. How is that a successful model going forward for the European economy?
It's not. It's not. By the way, it's not just Germany. It's the U.S. President Obama has his export initiative. This is a myth dating back hundreds of years, back to the medieval era. People believe that exports are the purpose of trade. Exports are the benefit of trade, and imports are the cost we have to pay. That's crazy, right? Exports are what you pay. Imports are what you get and what you enjoy. So the purpose of trade should be to maximize imports, to get as many imports as possible with as few exports as possible. Governments never get that because it doesn't play to the political prejudices that a lot of people have, the economic misinformation that a lot of people have. And so governments pander to this myth that exports are good and imports are bad, and you're right, it's exactly the opposite.
And so, what about the German model can the rest of Europe take away? I mean, if the Germans are saying, look, we want a super Germany for Europe, that means that we're going to suppress wages so that all these people can actually, work on things that we're going to export to the United States, apparently, or China, or wherever else they're going to export it. How's that going to work? Is it going to work?
No, you will not make Germany's not going to make itself richer by that. Europe will not be made richer by that. There may be other forces at work within Germany and within Europe that offset that negative effect. But you don't make yourself richer by saying, look, we're going to pour more resources into giving more stuff to foreigners and demanding fewer things in return. You just don't make yourself richer that way. You wouldn't make yourself richer as an individual. You wouldn't make yourself richer as a household. You don't make yourself richer as a nation by pursuing that backward strategy.
And, it could well be that that's what's going on in Europe right now, is they're pursuing that, and that's actually causing their economy to go down because they're not getting enough of the boost from the exports that they expected.
My guess is, I haven't seen any recent data, my guess is if you look at the consumption ability, the ability to consume of ordinary German families, of ordinary Spanish families, even of ordinary British families, although Britain's a little bit better off than the other parts of Germany. My guess is that those abilities to consume are negatively correlated with the policies that those countries might be pursuing in terms of pushing exports. The more you make someone pay to send something to someone else, the poorer you make that person, and that's what those governments are doing.
Let me ask you a question. This is another question that I was thinking that we'll have that has some concurrence here. What value does a libertarian economic framework provide in thinking about the economy? If you could sum that up in sort of a paragraph or two, what are your thoughts there?
There's, in my ideal world, there's no centralized locus of power in order to give special privileges to corporations, to labor unions, to consumer groups. Everything's decentralized. Each person bears the responsibility for his or her own decisions. They get the benefit, they get the cost. This incredibly competitive system tends to generate outcomes that are as universally acceptable as possible, as opposed to having a concentrated power source that gives special privileges to some people, because those special privileges always come at the expense of others.
Now, a lot of people have a libertarian bent. They talk about open borders. Actually, we have Brian Kaplan, who's on our show all the time.
And
so that's why I wanted to ask you about this.
Colleagues,
and you know, he's big on immigration. And my question is, people who are of a libertarian mindset, who say that they want open borders, come up against liberals. They want pro-immigration policies, but then when it comes to open borders, they say no.
Yeah.
What's going on there? Why is there this disconnect? Or why is there this symbiosis in terms of yes, immigration, but no, we don't want it to be that far? And where do you fall on that?
Oh, I'm an open borders kind of guy. I would like to see the United States return to the system that we had really before 1924, right? So people came in through ports of such as Ellis Island and other places, and as long as you weren't carrying some horrible disease, you weren't an obvious threat to America, you came in. There were no quotas. By family, by ethnicity, by national origin. People are the ultimate resource. And if people want to immigrate to the United States, I say, great, let them come. They'll make our economy stronger. They'll bring more ideas. They'll bring more work effort.
That sounds great. So what's the opposition to that?
Well, people worry. Just opposition to that is the same as the opposition to free trade. Right? So if you let competition from foreigners come in, well, that hurts my job. That hurts my industry. And so if you're a low-skilled worker, I can understand you don't like having to compete with other low-skilled workers who may be coming in. But competition's part of what it means to be in a modern economy. And there's no reason we should restrict competition when it comes to workers, which is what immigration restrictions do.
And how do you compensate, so to speak, that person? Let's say that they're now a part of this advanced society. They're in this society over here, which is advanced, and this other society, which has a lower standard of living, is now importing their workers here. This guy over here is saying, wait a minute, now I'm in competition with these guys, and my standard of living is going down. What do you do for him?
I don't think you compensate. I don't think, and no one has an entitlement to having his or her products or services bought. If you want to sell your products or services, you compete in the market against anyone who can compete against you. Businesses shouldn't be protected, nor should workers be protected. And the more we protect people from that kind of competition, the more we strangle the economy, and the more we keep down living standards, especially for future generations. So if we want to make sure our economy is dynamic and growing, and if we really care about our children and grandchildren, as people say they do, then we want as much competition today as possible so that economic growth will be as dynamic and as open as possible into the future. That will ensure the highest possible living standards for our children and grandchildren. That includes open immigration.
That was Don Boudreax, professor of economics at George Mason University and a senior fellow at the Mercatus Center. Time now for a very quick break, but stick around because when we return, Richard Wolff will be on the show. Richard sat down with me and my colleague, actually, not me at all, but my colleague, Edward Harrison, earlier this week to talk about minimum wage. And you definitely don't want to miss what he has